Blood is thicker than water, but blind, toxic loyalty will drown an entire family. This is the story of a man who held the keys to a $500 million shipping empire and a marriage to a brilliant woman who would have moved mountains for him. But when forced to choose between the wife who built a future with him and the matriarch who controlled his inheritance with an iron fist, he made a fatal miscalculation. He chose his mother. In doing so, he didn't just break the heart of the only person who truly loved him. He triggered a catastrophic, scorched earth chain of events that burned a century-old legacy entirely to the ground. Sophia Jennett never cared about old money. Raised by a public school teacher and a mechanic in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, she understood the value of a dollar and the sweat required to earn it. By the time she was 28, she had clawed her way to the top of her class at Cornell and secured a highly coveted position as a senior associate at Farnsworth and Clark Design, a prestigious architectural firm in downtown Boston. She was fiercely independent, razor-sharp, and beautifully grounded. Then she met William. William Hastings was the heir apparent to Hastings Maritime Holdings, a logistics and shipping empire that had dominated the eastern seaboard since the 1920s. They met at a charity gala for urban development. William was charming, self-deprecating, and seemingly desperate to escape the suffocating bubble of his family's wealth. He was drawn to Sophia's unapologetic ambition and the way she looked at the world not as something to be bought, but as something to be built. "You're the most real thing I've ever known," he told her one night, overlooking the Boston harbor from his penthouse. "In my world, everything is a transaction, but you just see me." Their whirlwind romance felt like a modern fairy tale. Within 18 months, William proposed with a flawless 3-carat estate diamond, but the fairy tale was about to collide with a very cold, very immovable reality. William's mother, Amelia Hastings. Amelia was a woman sculpted from ice and silk. As the widow of the late CEO and the trustee of the Hastings Family Trust, she wielded 51% of the company's voting shares. She controlled the board, she controlled the money, and most importantly, she controlled William. From the moment Sophia was introduced at the family's sprawling Nantucket summer estate, the psychological warfare began. Amelia didn't yell. She didn't insult Sophia outright. Instead, she used the subtle, devastating language of high society condescension. During a formal dinner, Amelia leaned across the mahogany table, her eyes glinting in the candlelight. "William tells me you design office buildings, Sophia. How quaint. It must be so exhausting, working with all those contractors. My William, of course, is preparing to take over the fleet. It requires a partner who understands the art of hosting, not just drawing blueprints." Sophia, trying to keep the peace, smiled politely. "Architecture is actually quite demanding, Mrs. Hastings. It's about creating foundations that last." Amelia merely sipped her Chardonnay. "Foundations can always be bought, my dear. Legacy is what you inherit." The true warning sign, the red flag that Sophia later wished she hadn't ignored, came 3 weeks before the wedding. William arrived at Sophia's apartment, looking pale, clutching a thick manila envelope bearing the crest of Kessler and Foley, LLC, the most ruthless corporate law firm in Massachusetts. It was a prenuptial agreement, but it wasn't just a standard protection of assets. It was a leash. Asterisk. The stipulations. If the marriage dissolved, Sophia would receive a meager severance that wouldn't cover a year's rent in Boston. Asterisk. The morality clause. The document included bizarrely specific clauses about public behavior, media appearances, and even how holidays were to be divided specifically, that all major holidays must be spent at the Hastings estate. Asterisk. The NDA. A lifetime non-disclosure agreement forbidding Sophia from ever speaking about the inner workings of the Hastings family or the business. "William, this isn't a marriage contract," Sophia said, her voice shaking as she read the pages. "This is an employment agreement. It essentially says, your mother can fire me if I step out of line." William ran his hands through his hair, pacing the room. Sophia, please. It's just standard Kessler and Foley boilerplate, my mother insisted. You know my uncle is trying to challenge me for the CEO position next year. My mother holds the voting block. If I don't sign this, if we don't play along, she'll back my uncle. I lose the company. He dropped to his knees, taking her hands. It's just paper, Sophia. Once I'm CEO, I'll have the power. I'll change the trust. I just need you to trust me. I choose you. I always will. Just help me get through this. Blinded by love and believing in his promise, Sophia signed. They were married in an extravagant ceremony at Martha's Vineyard, a wedding meticulously planned and entirely paid for by Amelia. Sophia felt less like a bride and more like an extra in a Hastings corporate promotional video. As she danced with her new husband, Amelia watched from the edge of the dance floor, her smile cold, her eyes calculating. The trap was set. The first 2 years of their marriage were a masterclass in gaslighting and boundary erosion. William and Sophia moved into a stunning brownstone in Beacon Hill, ostensibly a wedding gift from Amelia. But the gift came with a Trojan horse. Amelia had purchased the brownstone immediately adjacent to theirs. The physical proximity was suffocating. Amelia had retained a set of master keys to their home for emergencies, a privilege she abused constantly. Sophia would come home exhausted from a 14-hour day at the architecture firm, having just secured a massive contract to design a new wing for the Boston Children's Hospital, only to find Amelia sitting in her living room, directing a team of interior decorators. "Oh, Sophia, darling," Amelia purred one Tuesday evening, motioning to a man holding fabric swatches. "I noticed your drapery was looking terribly austere. I've taken the liberty of ordering these imported Italian silks. The modern, sterile look you prefer just doesn't suit a Hastings residence." "Amelia, this is our home," Sophia said, her patience fraying. "I like our living room the way it is. Furthermore, you can't just let yourself in when we aren't here." Amelia's expression turned deeply wounded. "I was only trying to help you, dear. You work such punishing hours." William mentioned his back was aching from that dreadful modern sofa you bought. "I'm simply looking out for my son." When Sophia confronted William that night, expecting him to defend their privacy, he immediately folded under the pressure. "Sophia, she's lonely," William reasoned, unknotting his silk tie. "My father is gone. The company is her whole life. Let her have the curtains. Is it really worth starting World War III over fabric? We have the board meeting next month, and I need her in a good mood. Just keep the peace. For me, keep the peace." It became the mantra of their marriage. Sophia was expected to absorb the disrespect, the backhanded compliments, and the blatant invasions of privacy, all to ensure William's path to the CEO chair remained unobstructed. The psychological toll on Sophia was immense. Amelia began organizing high-profile dinner parties at the brownstone, inviting industry titans, shipping magnates, and local politicians. She would intentionally schedule these events on evenings when she knew Sophia was working late to meet design deadlines. When Sophia inevitably arrived late, still wearing her tailored office suits instead of an evening gown, Amelia would sigh dramatically in front of the guests. Ah, the modern woman, always prioritizing the drafting table over her husband's legacy. Poor William works so hard, it's a shame he has to play host alone. William would laugh nervously, offering Sophia a quick, apologetic glance, but he never corrected his mother. He never stood up and said, "Actually, my wife is brilliant, and she just secured a multi-million-dollar city contract." He remained silent, sipping his scotch, complicit in her humiliation. The breaking point of this era occurred during the Hastings Maritime Annual Retreat in Aspen. Amelia had cornered Sophia in the lodge, while William was out skiing with the board members. "You know, Sophia," Amelia began, staring out at the snow-capped peaks, "William's transition to CEO is requiring more of his time. The board is looking for stability. They are looking for a cohesive family unit." "We are a cohesive unit, Amelia," Sophia replied calmly. "Are you?" Amelia turned, her gaze icy. Because, rumor has it, you're angling for a partnership at your little firm. That would require even more travel. More time away from William? A Hastings CEO needs a wife who is present, who manages the philanthropic arm, who hosts. Not a woman chasing her own vanity projects. My career is not a vanity project, Sophia said, her voice dropping an octave. It's my livelihood, and William supports it. Amelia let out a sharp, genuine laugh. Oh, you poor, naive girl. William supports whatever is easiest in the moment. But when push comes to shove, William knows where his bread is buttered. The trust stipulates that the voting shares pass to him only upon my approval of his maturity and stability. If I tell him your career is an obstacle to his succession, he will ask you to quit, and you will. Sophia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the aspen snow. He would never do that. Amelia smiled, a terrifying, victorious smirk. Let's test that theory, shall we? The storm finally broke 6 months later, crashing down with a violence that shattered the facade of their marriage forever. It was mid-October. Hastings Maritime Holdings was facing its biggest crisis in a decade. A massive labor strike was brewing at the eastern ports. Ships were stalled, millions of dollars were hemorrhaging daily, and the media was swarming. The board of directors was panicking, and William's uncle was using the crisis to argue that William was too inexperienced to take the helm. The emergency board vote to officially instate William as CEO was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Concurrently, Sophia was facing the zenith of her career. After a grueling year of pitches and sleepless nights, Farnsworth and Clark had made it to the final round to design the new international terminal at Logan Airport. The final presentation, the one that would determine if she made partner, was scheduled for Thursday morning. On Wednesday night, Sophia was in the home office, surrounded by blueprints, 3D models, and financial projections. She was running on coffee and adrenaline. The heavy oak door to the office pushed open. William walked in, flanked by Amelia. The air in the room instantly grew heavy. William? Amelia? What's going on? Sophia asked, taking off her reading glasses. William looked exhausted, his face pale and drawn. He wouldn't meet Sophia's eyes. He looked at the floor, then at his mother. Amelia stood tall, wearing an immaculate tweed suit, looking perfectly composed amidst the chaos. William has something he needs to discuss with you, Sophia, Amelia prompted, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. Sophia, William started, his voice cracking slightly. The strike, it's a disaster. The PR is a nightmare. Uncle Rowan is calling for a vote of no confidence. The board is demanding a show of absolute unity and stability from my side. I know, Will. It's awful. I'll be there at the gala, on Friday night right by your side, Sophia said, standing up. My presentation is tomorrow morning, but after that, I am entirely yours. Whatever you need. That's the problem, William said, finally looking up. Tomorrow morning, my mother has arranged an emergency press conference at the harbor. We are announcing a new philanthropic initiative for the dockworkers' families to soften the PR blow. All the local news networks will be there. Sophia froze. Okay, that sounds like a smart strategy. Good luck. You don't understand, Sophia, Amelia interjected smoothly. The press conference requires the family. It requires the future CEO and his devoted wife standing together, showing the city that the Hastings family cares. You need to be there, standing next to William. Tomorrow morning, Sophia's heart began to pound in her ears. William, you know my Logan Airport pitch is tomorrow at 9 a.m. I am the lead architect. I cannot miss it. I've worked on this for 14 months. Sophia, please, William begged, stepping forward. This is for the company. This is my entire future. If we don't present a united front tomorrow, my mother can't guarantee the board will vote for me on Friday. If I lose this, I lose everything. You want me to skip the biggest presentation of my life for a photo op? Sophia asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. I can do a press conference at noon. I can do one at 2 p.m., but I have to be at that pitch. A wife's duty is to her husband's legacy, not to a municipal building contract, Amelia said sharply. If you cannot prioritize this family in its darkest hour, how can the board trust William's judgment in marrying you? Sophia ignored Amelia completely, stepping closer to her husband. William, look at me. I have sacrificed my privacy. I have smiled through every insult your mother has thrown at me. I signed that draconian prenup because you promised me we were a team. I need you to be my team right now. Tell her I have to work. Tell her we will find another way. Silence stretched across the room, thick and suffocating. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a hammer against an anvil. William looked at Sophia, the woman who had loved him for who he was, not what his name was. Then he looked at Amelia, the woman who held the strings to the only identity he had ever cared about, the CEO of Hastings. Sophia, William whispered, the cowardice radiating from him like a sickness. I need you to call your partners. Tell them you have a family emergency. Tell them you have to step down from the project. Sophia felt the floor drop out from beneath her. It wasn't just that he was asking her to miss a meeting. He was asking her to fall on her sword, to destroy her own professional reputation, simply to appease his mother's manufactured crisis. You want me to quit? She asked, the tears welling up but refusing to fall. It's just for now, William pleaded, reaching for her arm. Once I'm CEO, you can go back to work. I promise. But right now, I need you to be my wife. I need you to choose me. No, William. Sophia stepped back, avoiding his touch, as if it would burn her. You are asking me to choose her. You are choosing her. Amelia stepped forward, a triumphant gleam in her eye. William has made his priorities clear. Sophia. The question is, are you a part of this family, or aren't you? Sophia looked around the room at the expensive, imported Italian silk curtains she hated, at the man she thought she knew, and at the mother-in-law who had finally won. The love she had for William didn't fade. It violently shattered, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. I'm not, Sophia said quietly. She walked over to her desk, neatly stacked her blueprints, and placed them into her leather portfolio. Sophia, what are you doing? William asked, panic finally lacing his voice. I'm going to a hotel, she said, zipping the bag. And tomorrow, I am going to win the Logan Airport contract. And then, I am going to call a divorce attorney. If you walk out that door, Amelia threatened, her voice like a whip, you walk away with nothing. The prenup is ironclad. You will leave with the clothes on your back. Sophia stopped at the doorway. She didn't look back at William. She looked straight into Amelia's cold, victorious eyes. You can keep the money, Amelia, Sophia said, her voice steady and resolute. You can keep the house, and you can keep your son. You deserve each other. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, William stood paralyzed in the center of the room. He had secured his mother's approval. He had secured the path to the CEO chair. But as the silence settled over the empty brownstone, a hollow, terrifying realization began to creep into his chest. He had just won the battle, but he had no idea the absolute war that was about to rain down upon his empire. The morning after Sophia walked out of the Beacon Hill brownstone, the skies over Boston were a sharp, unforgiving blue. At 8:45 a.m., Sophia stood in the glass-paneled boardroom of the Massachusetts Port Authority. She hadn't slept a wink, having spent the night in a generic suite at the Marriott Long Wharf, but her adrenaline was a physical force. When the review committee filed in, Sophia delivered the presentation of her life. She didn't just show them blueprints. She showed them a vision of the new Logan Airport terminal that prioritized human flow, sustainable energy, and structural resilience. Her voice never wavered. By 11:30 a.m., the lead commissioner shook her hand, an unspoken guarantee that Farnsworth and Clark had secured the $300 million city contract. Sophia was immediately fast-tracked for a full partnership. 3 miles away, William was experiencing a very different kind of morning. The press conference at the Boston Fish Pier was an unmitigated disaster. Amelia had orchestrated the event with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. She stood behind William, dressed in a somber, custom-tailored Chanel suit, while William read a heavily sanitized, legally approved statement from a teleprompter, announcing the Hastings Family Dockworker Relief Fund. The optics were terrible. The striking dockworkers, standing behind the barricades in their high-vis vests and worn boots, didn't want charity. They wanted fair wages, safer working conditions, and modernized equipment. When a seasoned reporter from the Boston Globe shouted over the cameras, "Mr. Hastings, your wife is famously an advocate for urban labor rights, yet she isn't here today. Does she support this initiative?" William froze. Amelia immediately stepped to the microphone, her smile razor-thin. "My daughter-in-law is indisposed with a private family matter. We are here to focus on the workers." The headline the next day didn't focus on the charity fund. It read, "Hastings Hair Fumbles Crisis, While Wife Goes Missing." Despite the public relations nightmare, Amelia's backroom dealings paid off. On Friday afternoon, the board of directors narrowly voted to officially instate William as CEO of Hastings Maritime Holdings. Uncle Rowan abstained, a silent declaration of war, but Amelia's 51% voting bloc forced the motion through. William had his empire, but the moment the ink dried on his contract, the reality of his Faustian bargain began to set in. He returned to the brownstone that evening to find it eerily silent. Sophia's side of the closet was empty. Her drafting table in the office was gone. The only thing left of her was her wedding ring, sitting cold and heavy on the center of the kitchen island, next to a business card belonging to Rebecca Hayes, one of the most ruthless family law attorneys in New England. William collapsed onto a bar stool, burying his face in his hands. He reached for his phone to call her, to beg her to come back, to tell her he had made a mistake, but before he could unlock the screen, the front door clicked open. Amelia walked in, carrying a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon and 2 crystal flutes. To the new chief executive officer, she proclaimed, popping the cork with a festive snap. She glanced at the wedding ring on the counter and didn't even blink. Good riddance. I always knew she didn't have the stomach for this echelon of society. Thomas Kessler is already drawing up the enforcement of the prenup. We will squash any attempt she makes to extort you. She doesn't want to extort me, Mother, William said, his voice hollow. She just wanted me. Nonsense, Amelia waved her hand dismissively, pouring the champagne. She wanted the lifestyle, and when she realized it required actual loyalty to the family, she ran. Now, drink up, William. On Monday, we have to purge Rowan's loyalists from the logistics division. The word hit William like a physical blow. He was the CEO, but Amelia had no intention of relinquishing control. Over the next 6 months, William discovered that he wasn't a king. He was a hostage in a very expensive cage. Amelia's interference became absolute. She demanded to sit in on executive meetings. She vetoed William's choices for the new chief operating officer, installing a sycophant named Andrew Pendleton, a man who had been secretly reporting to Amelia for a decade. When William tried to negotiate a compromise with the striking dockworkers to get the ships moving, Amelia went behind his back and hired aggressive private security firms to intimidate the union leaders, escalating the strike and drawing federal scrutiny. Without Sophia to ground him, to offer objective advice, and to remind him of his own moral compass, William began to wither. He started drinking heavily. His decisions became erratic. He was drowning in his mother's empire, and the water was rising fast. 14 months after the separation, the divorce was quietly finalized. True to her word, Sophia did not fight the prenup. She didn't want a dime of the Hastings money. She wanted a clean break. Her career had skyrocketed. As a new partner at Farnsworth and Clark, she was overseeing multi-million-dollar commercial developments across the East Coast. She had reclaimed her maiden name, Sophia Jennett, and bought a beautiful, light-filled loft in the South End. She was thriving. Hastings Maritime Holdings, however, was bleeding out. The prolonged dockworker strike, exacerbated by Amelia's aggressive union-busting tactics, had cost the company its 2 biggest international shipping contracts. Q3 profits were down 30%. The board was furious, and Uncle Rowan was quietly circulating a petition for an emergency vote of no confidence to oust William. Desperate for a massive infusion of capital to stabilize the stock, William found a lifeline. Sutton and Croft Global, a massive European supply chain conglomerate, was opening a massive operational hub in Boston. They needed an exclusive logistics and maritime partner to handle billions of dollars in freight over the next 10 years. The contract would single-handedly save Hastings Maritime. William threw everything he had into the pitch. He worked 80-hour weeks, trying to bypass Andrew Pendleton and his mother's interference. But Amelia couldn't help herself. 3 days before the pitch, Amelia marched into William's corner office and tossed his presentation onto his desk. "This is entirely too accommodating. William," she scolded, "you are offering them a 20% discount on peak seasonal routing. Hastings does not discount our legacy. We are the premier fleet on the eastern seaboard. You will rewrite this to demand a premium. Mother, Sutton and Croft doesn't care about our legacy," William pleaded, running a hand over his exhausted face. "They care about margins. If we price ourselves out, they will go to Chesapeake Logistics. We need this contract." "Do not use that tone with me," Amelia snapped, her eyes hardening. "I control the board. I control the shares. You will present the premium pricing model, or I will have Andrew Pendleton do it instead." Defeated, crushed under the weight of her perpetual threats, William capitulated. The pitch meeting was held at the Sutton and Croft temporary headquarters in the financial district. William arrived with Andrew Pendleton and a team of analysts. When William walked into the massive glass boardroom to present to the selection committee, his heart stopped. Sitting at the center of the long mahogany table, flanked by European executives, was Sophia. She looked stunning. She wore a sharp, navy blue suit, her hair pulled back into a sleek chignon. She looked confident, powerful, and entirely untouchable. Sutton and Croft Global had hired Farnsworth and Clark as the lead developers for their new operational hub. As the lead architect and project manager, Sophia had a deciding vote on the logistical integrations. She was on the selection committee. William felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. He looked at Sophia, searching her eyes for a flicker of recognition, of pity, of anything. But her gaze was perfectly polite, professionally detached. She looked at him, the way one looks at a stranger. "Good morning, Mr. Hastings," the lead European executive said, gesturing to the projector. "We are eager to see how your maritime infrastructure can integrate with Miss Jennet's structural timelines." The presentation was a massacre. Forced to use Amelia's inflated, arrogant pricing model, William stumbled through the slides. He watched the executives' faces fall from interest to skepticism, and finally, to polite disdain. Then came the Q&A. "Mr. Hastings," Sophia spoke for the first time. Her voice was steady, betraying zero emotion. "Your projections assume a 98% on-time docking rate during the winter months. However, your fleet relies heavily on legacy Class C freighters, which require older docking mechanisms. Given the modernization of the port facilities we are building, how do you plan to mitigate the offloading delays without absorbing exorbitant retrofitting costs? Your pricing model doesn't seem to account for fleet upgrades." It was a brilliant, devastating question. It was the exact weakness William had warned his mother about, the exact detail she had forced him to delete from his original presentation to make their profit margins look artificially higher. William opened his mouth, but Andrew Pendleton interjected, puffing out his chest. "Miss Jennet, Hastings Maritime has a century of experience navigating these waters. Our legacy speaks for itself. We don't anticipate any operational friction." Sophia didn't even look at Andrew. She kept her eyes locked on William. "Experience is valuable, Mr. Pendleton, but ships cannot dock on legacy. They dock on infrastructure. Thank you for your time, gentlemen." The rejection letter arrived via courier the next morning. It was brief and professionally brutal. Hastings Maritime was not selected. The contract went to their largest rival, Chesapeake Logistics. When the news hit the board of directors, the fallout was instantaneous. Uncle Rowan struck like a viper. He called an emergency board meeting for the following Monday. He had secured enough votes from the independent directors who were sick of Amelia's arrogance and William's incompetence to trigger the fiduciary failure clause in the corporate bylaws. William sat alone in his office, the rejection letter sitting on his desk. He picked up his phone and pulled up Sophia's contact. He stared at her name for 10 minutes, the weight of his choices crashing down on him with suffocating clarity. He hadn't just lost a wife, he had lost his closest advisor, his partner, and the only person who had possessed the strength to save him from himself. The door to his office flew open, hitting the wall with a loud bang. Amelia stormed in, her face flushed with unprecedented rage. "Do you see what she did?" Amelia screamed, pointing a trembling finger at him. "That vindictive little social climber. She sabotaged us. She poisoned the committee against us." William looked up at his mother. For the first time in his life, the illusion was entirely shattered. He didn't see a formidable matriarch. He saw a paranoid, aging woman whose toxic pride had just destroyed a 100-year-old empire. "She didn't sabotage us, Mother," William said quietly, his voice devoid of any warmth. "She asked a simple question about our infrastructure, a question I wanted to answer in the original pitch, before you forced me to lie." "How dare you speak to me that way?" Amelia sneered. "I am trying to save your birthright." "No, you aren't," William said, standing up. He felt completely hollowed out, but strangely, for the first time, he felt a spark of terrifying freedom. "You were trying to save your control. You used me. You chased away the only good thing that ever happened to me, and I was too much of a coward to stop you. The board is going to vote me out on Monday, Mother. Rowan has the votes. It's over." Amelia scoffed, waving her hand. "Rowan is a fool. I still hold the 51% trust proxy. I will block the vote." William looked at her, a bitter, tragic smile touching the corners of his mouth. "You haven't read the bylaws regarding fiduciary negligence, have you, Mother?" William asked softly. "If the CEO is ousted for gross negligence, resulting in a massive financial deficit, like losing the Sutton and Croft contract, the trust proxy is temporarily suspended, and the board's vote becomes absolute." Amelia froze, the color draining from her pristine face. The iron grip she had held on the family, the company, and her son for decades suddenly snapped. You are going to let them take the company?" she whispered, horrified. "I don't have a choice anymore," William said, reaching for his coat. He walked past her, pausing at the door. "You won, Mother. You got me all to yourself. I hope it was worth it." The Monday morning of the emergency board meeting, Boston was hammered by a torrential nor'easter. The skies were a bruised, violent gray, mirroring the atmosphere on the 40th floor of the Hastings Maritime Headquarters on State Street. William sat at the head of the colossal mahogany table, looking out at the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. He felt entirely numb. The panic that had gripped him for the past year had burned itself out, leaving only a hollow, echoing exhaustion. At exactly 9 a.m., Uncle Rowan walked in. He didn't come alone. He was flanked by the company's chief financial officer, a fleet of corporate auditors, and 3 independent board members who had historically voted with Amelia but had spent the weekend looking at the catastrophic Q3 projections. Amelia arrived 3 minutes later, sweeping into the room in a charcoal cashmere coat, her chin held high. She was trailed by Thomas Kessler, the senior partner at Kessler and Foley, LLC, the family's notoriously vicious legal counsel. "Rowan," Amelia said, her voice dripping with venom as she took her seat to William's right. "This grandstand is pathetic, even for you. The bylaws require a 2/3 majority to even initiate a motion of no confidence. You don't have the votes. Sit down." Rowan didn't sit. He placed a thick, leather-bound dossier on the table. "Amelia," Rowan began, his tone lacking its usual combative edge, replaced by a cold, clinical finality. "As of 8 a.m. this morning, the Department of Labor has officially opened a federal investigation into Hastings Maritime. They are looking into the aggressive, unverified, private security firms you hired to intimidate the union leaders during the strike. The fines alone could bankrupt our operational reserves. Amelia scoffed, waving a manicured hand. Labor disputes are a cost of doing business. Thomas will handle the federal inquiry. It's a minor nuisance. It's not a nuisance, Mother, William spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it silenced the room. It's the end. Amelia shot him a lethal glare. Quiet, William. I am handling this. No, Amelia, you aren't, Rowan continued. Because of the lost Sutton and Croft contract, our stock plummeted 22% at the opening bell. The banks are calling in the margins on the loans we took out to float the fleet during the strike. We are hemorrhaging cash. Therefore, under Section 4, Paragraph B of the Corporate Charter, I am initiating a vote of no confidence against the Chief Executive Officer for gross fiduciary negligence. Amelia slammed her palm on the table. I hold the 51% trust proxy. I veto the motion. Rowan looked at Thomas Kessler. The high-priced lawyer adjusted his glasses, refusing to meet Amelia's eyes. Amelia, Kessler said slowly, clearing his throat, under the fiduciary failure clause, the trust proxy is temporarily suspended to protect the shareholders from catastrophic mismanagement. Your 51% is currently frozen. The vote goes to the floor. The color completely vanished from Amelia's face. For the first time in her meticulously controlled life, she was entirely powerless. She looked around the room, making eye contact with the independent board members she had wined and dined, threatened and bribed for decades. They all looked away. Even Andrew Pendleton, the sycophantic COO she had personally installed, was staring firmly at his legal pad. He had already cut a backdoor deal with Rowan to keep his severance package. All in favor of the immediate termination of William Hastings as Chief Executive Officer, Rowan announced. 9 hands went up around the table. Amelia sat frozen, her chest heaving. William, she hissed, desperate. Do something. Fight them. William looked at the 9 raised hands. He thought about the dock workers standing in the cold. He thought about the Sutton and Croft executives shaking their heads. Mostly, he thought about Sophia, standing in that boardroom, looking at him as if he were nothing but a disappointing stranger. Slowly, deliberately, William raised his own right hand. A collective gasp echoed through the boardroom. William was voting against himself. It was a complete, unconditional surrender. The motion carries, Rowan said quietly. William, you are to clear out your office by noon. Amelia, you no longer have an executive function within this building. Security will escort you to the lobby. Amelia stood up, her chair screeching violently against the hardwood floor. Her perfectly composed facade cracked, revealing the terrified, bitter woman underneath. You are all fools, she screamed, her voice echoing off the glass walls. I built this. I kept this family relevant. You will burn it to the ground? No, Mother, William said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket for the last time. You already did. The collapse of Hastings Maritime Holdings was not a slow, dignified leak. It was a catastrophic, violent hull breach. Within 72 hours of William's forced resignation, the facade of their century-old dynasty entirely disintegrated. The news of the fiduciary failure and the internal boardroom mutiny leaked to the financial press by Tuesday morning. The Wall Street Journal ran a scathing front-page exposé detailing the gross mismanagement, the aggressive union-busting tactics, and the sheer arrogance that had cost the company its lifeline contract with Sutton and Croft Global. The public fallout was instantaneous and utterly merciless. Uncle Rowan, having seized the reins of a sinking ship, quickly realized the situation was far worse than the board had anticipated. The aggressive loans Amelia had forced the company to take out to artificially inflate their dividend payouts during the strike were tied directly to the valuation of their fleet. When the stock plummeted 25% in a single week, the corporate lenders panicked. Margin calls were issued. The banks demanded immediate liquidity that Hastings Maritime simply did not possess. To avoid a complete, humiliating Chapter 7 bankruptcy liquidation, Rowan was forced to initiate a hostile restructuring. It was a brutal fire sale. Over the next 6 months, The entire Hastings shipping fleet, every cargo vessel, every commercial tugboat, and every leased docking bay from Boston to Baltimore was sold off to their biggest, most hated competitor, Chesapeake Logistics. They were bought for pennies on the dollar. The ultimate indignity came when the Hastings flagship vessel, a massive freighter, christened the Amelia 3 decades prior, was towed into the dry docks to have the Hastings crest violently sandblasted off its hull, replaced by the stark, utilitarian logo of their rivals. Hastings Maritime effectively ceased to exist as a functional shipping empire. It became nothing more than a hollow holding shell, a ghost of a legacy drowning in litigation, because the Hastings family trust was almost entirely, foolishly tied up in company stock. The family's generational wealth evaporated in a matter of months. For decades, Amelia had believed the trust was an impenetrable fortress, a divine right of wealth that could never be touched. She was wrong. The massive corporate debt pierced the veil of the trust, and the creditors came for everything. Amelia Hastings, however, utterly refused to accept her new reality. The matriarch who had controlled Boston's high society with an iron fist descended into a paranoid, delusional state of denial. Instead of cutting her losses and salvaging what little personal wealth she had left, she waged a scorched-earth legal campaign. She hired Thomas Kessler and his team of vicious attorneys to file a barrage of frivolous lawsuits against Rowan, the independent board members, the federal labor investigators, and even the banks. She claimed conspiracy, fraud, and corporate treason, but high-priced lawyers demand high-priced retainers. Kessler and Foley LLC bled Amelia dry. Month by month, her liquid assets were drained to fund a legal war she had absolutely no chance of winning. When the cash ran out, she began liquidating her physical assets. Her collection of post-impressionist paintings was quietly auctioned off at Sotheby's. Her vintage jewelry, pieces that had been in the Hastings family for generations, were sold to private buyers in Geneva. It wasn't enough. 18 months after William's ousting, the inevitable occurred. The sprawling, iconic Nantucket summer estate, the very place where Amelia had first initiated her psychological warfare against Sophia, was foreclosed upon by the bank. 2 months later, the Beacon Hill brownstone was seized by the IRS to satisfy a mountain of unpaid capital gains taxes. Amelia was unceremoniously evicted from the life she believed she was genetically entitled to. The woman who had once dictated the guest lists of Boston's most elite charity galas was forced to pack her remaining clothes into cardboard boxes. She moved into a modest, rented, beige-carpeted, 2-bedroom condominium in Peabody, a working-class suburb she would have previously shuddered to even drive through. Her social exile was absolute. The elite circles of Boston society are notoriously ruthless. They only respect power and capital. The moment Amelia lost both, she became a pariah. Her calls to the country club were unreturned. Her invitations to the seasonal yacht club dinners ceased entirely. When she attempted to attend the annual symphony fundraiser, assuming her historical status would grant her entry, she was politely but firmly turned away at the door by security because her tickets had not been paid for. She spent her final years isolated in that cramped Peabody condo, surrounded by a few pieces of antique furniture that didn't fit through the narrow doorways, clutching her expired country club directory, bitterly cursing a world that had moved on without her. William did not fare much better, though his ruin was quieter, defined by a hollow, agonizing purgatory. Stripped of his title, his fortune, and the protective, suffocating bubble of his mother's influence, he found himself thrust into a harsh, meritocratic reality he was utterly unequipped to navigate. Without the Hastings name to shield his incompetence, the corporate world saw William for what he truly was, a tragically mediocre man who had never actually built anything of his own. His resume, entirely comprised of roles handed to him by his mother, held zero weight in the aggressive logistics industry. Every interview he attended ended in polite rejection. The executives knew his history. They knew he was the man who crashed a $500 million empire because he couldn't manage his own boardroom. Eventually, desperate to pay his mounting legal fees and basic living expenses, William was forced to leave Massachusetts entirely. He relocated to a bleak, industrial suburb of Newark, New Jersey. He managed to secure a job as a mid-level regional manager for a generic, mid-sized freight forwarding company. The irony was suffocating. He, the former CEO of the Eastern Seaboard's premier fleet, now sat in a windowless cubicle with fluorescent lighting, answering to a director 5 years his junior, managing trucking routes for discount appliance retailers. He lived in a stark, sparsely furnished one-bedroom apartment overlooking a noisy highway. He had stopped taking his mother's frantic, venomous phone calls a year prior, finally realizing the absolute toxicity of her grip, though the realization had come far too late to save his life. He spent his evenings sitting alone on a cheap polyester sofa, a far cry from the imported Italian silks his mother had once forced into his home. He drank cheap scotch from a water glass, staring at the television, haunted by the memory of the life he had thrown away. He thought of Sophia constantly. He remembered her brilliant mind, the way she laughed when she was hunched over her drafting table, and the fierce, unconditional loyalty she had offered him. He knew, with absolute crushing certainty, that he had traded a diamond for a handful of dust. But the ultimate, staggering twist of poetic justice, the final nail in the coffin of the Hastings legacy, did not belong to William or Amelia. It belonged entirely to Sophia Jennett. 3.5 years after the divorce was finalized, the final, crown jewel of the dead Hastings Empire was put on the chopping block. The historic, imposing Art Deco headquarters, building on State Street, the monolith where Amelia had orchestrated her reign and where William had surrendered his dignity, was put into receivership and auctioned off by the city of Boston to cover the remaining municipal debts. It was purchased for $85 million by the Boston Urban Renewal Initiative, a massive, well-funded, philanthropic coalition dedicated to inner-city development and labor rights. Their grand, highly publicized vision was to gut the corporate fortress and transform it into the largest vocational training center and union hall for maritime workers on the East Coast. It was a direct, beautiful counter-narrative to the anti-labor practices that had destroyed the Hastings Company. The architectural firm hired to spearhead the massive, high-profile renovation was none other than Farnsworth and Clark, and the lead partner on the project, the woman whose signature was required on every single demolition permit and structural redesign, was Sophia Jennett. On a crisp, brilliantly clear October afternoon, William happened to be in Boston. His New Jersey logistics company had sent him up to attend a mandatory, dreary supply chain management conference at a hotel near the harbor. During his lunch break, a masochistic, agonizing impulse drew him toward the financial district. He walked the familiar streets, his collar pulled up against the biting autumn wind, drawn toward his old building like a ghost haunting its own grave. As he approached the corner of State Street, he stopped dead in his tracks, guys. The breath knocked completely out of his lungs. The building was unrecognizable. The massive, intimidating bronze Hastings Maritime plaque had been violently ripped from the granite facade, leaving behind a scarred, pale rectangle of stone. In its place hung massive, multi-story scaffolding and a bright, bold, 50-foot banner announcing the future site of the Jennett Farnsworth Maritime Labor Center. William stepped behind the shadow of a bus stop awning, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his off-the-rack trench coat. His eyes darted to the sweeping, iconic marble steps of the building's entrance. Standing there, bathed in the sharp October sunlight, was Sophia. She wasn't wearing an evening gown. She wasn't wearing a tailored suit meant to appease a high society matriarch. She was wearing a scuffed white hard hat, a pair of dark, practical jeans, and a heavy, camel-colored wool coat. She was unrolling a massive sheet of structural blueprints across a temporary plywood work table set up right where the executive valets used to park his town car. She was surrounded by a dozen people, city councilmen, burly union leaders, wearing high-vis jackets, and a team of young, eager architects hanging on her every word. She looked unimaginably powerful. She looked vibrant, alive, and fiercely happy. She was laughing, pointing a pen at the blueprints, directing a construction foreman on where to knock down the walls of the former executive suites to create open-air classrooms for the dock workers. Tomb. She had taken the very fortress that had been used to belittle, control, and humiliate her, and she was physically, methodically dismantling it. She was tearing down the toxic legacy of Amelia Hastings, brick by brick, not out of petty revenge, but to build a foundation that actually mattered. She was creating something that would empower the very people the Hastings family had exploited. William stood across the street for a long time, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his regret. A part of him, a desperate, childish part, wanted to cross the street. He wanted to call out her name, to beg for her forgiveness, to tell her he finally understood what a catastrophic fool he had been. But as he watched her shake hands with a union leader, her smile radiant and genuine, a cold, hard truth settled over him. He didn't belong in her world anymore. He probably never did. He had chosen the suffocating, iron cage of his mother's conditional approval over the open sky of a partnership with a brilliant woman. He had allowed his mother to strip him of his courage, and in doing so, he had lost his right to stand beside someone like Sophia. He was just a regional manager from New Jersey now, a ghost, looking at a life that could have been his, if only he had been brave enough to claim it. William lowered his head, turning away from the building. He didn't look back. He merged into the busy afternoon foot traffic on State Street, pulling his coat tighter around his shoulders, and disappeared completely into the ordinary, nameless masses, leaving Sophia Jennett to build her masterpiece on the ruins of his empire. What a devastating reminder that toxic loyalty can cost you everything. William's fatal mistake wasn't just losing his empire. It was sacrificing the one person who truly had his back for a mother who only saw him as a pawn on a chessboard. Sophia didn't seek revenge. She simply outgrew them, building her own legacy on the ruins of their arrogance. If you found yourself holding your breath during this story, or if you've ever had to set a hard boundary with a toxic family member, hit that like button to let me know. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that walking away from toxicity is sometimes the biggest win of all. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another deep dive into the wild, dramatic, true stories of wealth, betrayal, and ultimate justice. See you in the next one.